Hello and good morning, and welcome to At Home with the Zen Gateway for today, which is Tuesday the 7th of July 2020. And we'll just wait a moment or two to let people into the viewing. Good morning, Dees. Good, excellent. Can you see and hear? Lovely. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Chris. Good. All right. That's excellent. Good morning, Steve and Roberta. Hi. Lovely. All right. Well, just perhaps another 30 seconds and then we'll start. Today we're actually going to be talking about Master Rinzai. It's quite a short piece. Hi, Phil. It's quite a short saying, pithy saying from Master Rinzai. But he's a very important figure, obviously, in the Zen canon because he's a founder of one of the two remaining houses of Zen. If we know, for example, in Japanese Zen, there are two houses that have a lineage going back unbroken, which is the Rinzai and Soto. There is also the Oxhead or Obaku house as well, but I don't believe that it's an unbroken line. I may be incorrect about that, but I've got a feeling it isn't. But the Rinzai and Soto are the two other ones, the main ones, old ones. Soto is the largest in Japan, followed by Rinzai, which is slightly smaller. So we're going to be looking at the story of Master Rinzai as well, talking a little bit about him. So onwards. So as usual, our passage is from the Wisdom of the Zen Masters. Master Rinzai was fond of asking, "What at this moment is lacking?" There we go. Told you it was very succinct and to the point. And there is a collection of his sermons called the Rinzai Roku, or the Record of Rinzai, which is wonderful. I would heartily recommend it as a text for any serious student of Zen, Mahayana Buddhism, or just Buddhism to have on their shelf. As a collection of sermons and pointers to insight, it's got to rank up there very highly indeed. But who was Master Rinzai? Well, Rinzai is his Japanese name. Linji is a Chinese name because he was indeed Chinese. He died in 866 AD, and that places him towards the latter part of the Tang dynasty, which runs from the 6th to the 9th century. And this particular dynasty was known as the Golden Flowering of Zen. It's a sort of I think sort of academics of Zen would say that that's rather a sort of rose-tinted view about this period. But certainly some of the very famous Zen masters lived during this period. Baso, Obaku and Rinzai being just some of the names to actually conjure with. Rinzai himself died quite young. He died in his middle 50s, and we don't exactly know when he was born. His teaching career was relatively short for a Zen master, and for a lineage holder it was only about 10 years. Yet despite that, the impetus that he set in motion is still with us well over 1,000 years later. And here we are. I mean, I was also trained in the Zen school as well. So, yeah. So obviously very important to my own personal history as well. But who was he? Well, he didn't actually start in Zen. He started in the Tendai school. And the Tendai school in China at that time was a sutra-based or scripture-based school. So what we know about Rinzai is that he was very well versed in the teachings, as well as the practices as well. Of course, they practiced meditation. But they knew the Abhidharma, they knew the commentaries. They were very quite scholastic, and this is a point that's always sort of made in Rinzai's story because it contrasts with what comes later. Because the thing is, although like many in his time, he was given to the monasteries quite young. When he grew up and became a young adult, he grew dissatisfied with the school, and he found that it didn't really supply the answers that he was looking for. And so he looked around and he ended up going to Obaku, Master Obaku, who was a lineage holder both of Huayan and Chan Zen, and his monastery was on the top of a mountain, as many of the monasteries were in those days. And these monasteries were very big, 800 to 1,000 inhabitants in total, so they were large affairs, and Rinzai fit in very well. And basically he was there for 2 years, and kept his head down and was very clearly, he stood out as someone who had skill and great potential as well. And the head monk noticed this. The head monk is one of the senior officials in the monastery, who himself, although he's not a roshi, although he's not the abbot and won't have his own disciples, he's the person that all the monks go to, because the roshi is a very remote figure. Basically, he is seen for interview and for teisho, which is the midday talk, and apart from that, he lives in his own quarters. He is away from the monks, and that's deliberate. He remains a sort of mysterious figure. So as for the sort of day-to-day problems, difficulties with meditation, daily life practice, or whatever, the head monk is the person that they sort of go to as counselor. So the head monk has a certain amount of cachet, but also is considered to have, to be well settled in the practice and to have his own, developed sense of insight as well. And basically, the head monk at that time noticed Rinzai, but he also noticed that he'd never been for interview to the master, to Master Robaku. And this is something that's important because if you're living in a monastery, you're living in a sort of high octane atmosphere. It's a very intense atmosphere. It is designed to remove lots of the extraneous distractions and to help the students who are there to really concentrate on developing their own spiritual insight. And part of that is having, regular face-to-face meetings or interviews with a Zen master, and that chemistry is really important because, as any of you who've read any of the Zen literature will know, there are often these interactions between master and student that become the trigger for the student, for the disciple's own insight. And Rinzai didn't seem to be taking part in this, so the head monk sort of stopped him one day and said, "Look, I've noticed that you don't go for interview to Obaku. Why not?" And Rinzai replied, saying, "Well, to be perfectly honest, I can't think of a question to ask him." Now, this again shows up something that's rather interesting because perhaps a little bit in the Zen school, we know it's a very disciplined school, and we think that if we just go along and do as, follow the instructions and do all that sort of properly, that everything's okay. But actually, in a way, the senior officials are not, and the teachers are not there to do our practice for us, and neither are they there to, force us to do something that we don't want to do. And sometimes you do see this, when people come into a disciplined atmosphere, they sort of often go backwards a little bit. They sort of regress to, like when they're at school and they played truant and they were told to do something and they would sort of sneak out, and all these sorts of, all the feelings about authority and rejection of authority, particularly for us because we're big into that, come to the surface, and they start to be replayed out if we're not careful. And so we have to be reminded, look, these people are not there to chase after you. You're a grown person now. So it's up, if you want to be here, be here. If you don't want to be here, then go and stop spoiling the atmosphere for everyone else. So basically the onus is put back on the student, and this is the importance of the asking the questions. This is why in the sutras and in the Pali Canon, people came to the Buddha and asked him questions. He did preach, but more often than not in the suttas and in the sutras, people come and ask the Buddha a question, and then the Buddha gives a discourse, and that's what the sutra will be. Again, the emphasis is that the Buddha will only teach if he's asked to. He's not there to put something out. He simply responds to the inquiries that people make. And so, again, that's just putting the emphasis on oneself. We are responsible for our own training. The motivation has to come from us. We have to find that motivation and keep it going, keep that flame going. So Yeah, so this is why it is important. This is why the head monk sort of accosted Rinzai as well. So when Rinzai said this to the head monk, I can't think of anything to ask him. The head monk simply responded, "Oh, that's easy. Just go and ask him what is the essence of Buddhism." Now, what is the essence of Buddhism? Again, if you're familiar with the stock literature, with the sort of Zen canon, you will have heard that sort of thing many times. So often, master disciple goes to Master Joshu and says, "What is Buddha?" And Joshu replies, "The oak tree in the garden," or something like that. What is Buddha? What is the essence of Buddhism? Who is the Buddha? All that sort of thing is really just one of those very generic questions that you can ask a Zen master, and it basically allows them to manifest their insight in that moment. So it's a very stock question, and so armed with this, Rinzai went off and had his first interview. And normally, when you go in for the interview, you slide the door open and you do a prostration to the Buddha, who will be sitting there on the shrine. And then you come in and then you kneel opposite the master and then you do the prostration to the master. And then the student speaks first. So again, it sort of replicates what was going on with the Buddha and his disciples. The master just sits there, won't say anything. So the disciple has to say something. And if for example the student is working on a koan, it will be at that point that the student would recite the koan, and then the master would ask for an answer, and it would go from there. Otherwise, the student just asks a question. And so, indeed, Rinzai said, what is the essence of Buddhism? And hardly had the words come out of his mouth when Obaku leant forward and slapped Rinzai full in the face. And with that, he rang the bell, brrr, which signals the end of the interview. So, Rinzai sort of got up, still shaken, and made his way out, doing presumably the proper prostrations. And afterwards, the head monk came up to him and said, "What happened?" And Rinzai said, "Well, the master hit me." And the head monk said, "Yes." And Rinzai said, "I don't understand." And so the head monk said, "Oh, maybe you should go again." So dutifully, Rinzai went again. And this time, after getting up from his prostration, Rinzai said, "What is the essence of?" And hardly even got the sentence out, and once again Obaku whack slapped him full in the face. Brrr, rang the bell, and out he went. And the head monk said again, "What happened?" He said, "The same thing. He hit me, and I still don't understand it." Said the head monk. "Maybe one more time will just sort of clear the matter up for you." And so, dutifully, Rinzai went back again. And this time, Rinzai had hardly taken breath. Whack! And suddenly the slap came again from Obaku, brrr, and he came out. And this time when the head monk accosted him, Rinzai said, "Look, it's no good. Clearly I am obstructed karmically. Clearly the affinity links are not there between us. I had better go elsewhere." Now, this is a very interesting answer because, perhaps if we'd been treated in that sort of way, quite roughly, we would be forming all sorts of thoughts about the master, just who the heck they think they are and how evil they are and whatever. But this didn't even occur to Rinzai. He was in no doubt at all about the master's insight. And he was in no doubt at all that the master was trying to show him something, but that he was too stupid or he was too immersed in delusion to really see it. And this is what he meant also by the affinity links. The affinity links are really important in both Chinese and Japanese Buddhism. In Japanese, they're called innen. And innen refers to the inherent potential of something, and then the surrounding causes or surrounding conditions, that best fit to bring out that potential in full. So the common example that's given, for example, if you've seen one of those Tibetan singing bowls, we use them in all Buddhism actually. It's a little brass bowl and it sits on a cushion, and you have a striker like this, and you go bong, often used in chanting, the idea is that that bowl, if just on its own, as it sits there silently, has the potential to produce this beautiful sound. But it's only when the striker comes into contact with it that it does so. So that is called innen. That is the when those two things come together, they produce this sound. They produce this third thing, and it's not just singing bowls and strikers that have innen. Also, human beings do as well. So, for example, if you have a natural musical potential, but you lived in a realm or world where there was no music at all, you could go through the whole of your life without ever realizing that potential. But one day you happen to hear a musical instrument or someone singing, and suddenly something inside you wakes up. That is innen. And so it is between the master and the student as well. That insight can arise, which is the beautiful sound, the third thing, if the innen is there, if the chemistry is there between the master and the student. But if the innen is not there, it doesn't matter how great the master is, it doesn't matter how great the potential of the student, if that chemistry isn't there, it won't work. So this is understood. This is understood, so there's no shame in it on either party. It's just that the innen isn't between them. And innen can change as well, by the way. So innen can exist between two people, and then over time it can also fall apart, subject to impermanence, as are all things, as we know. So this is what Rinzai was saying. So basically he said, clearly the innen isn't there, I better go elsewhere. And so, quick as a flash, the head monk said to him, well, you better go and see Obaku and take your formal leave of him. That's the polite thing to do. So off he went, the head monk, and went to see Obaku and said, look, that one who came to see you, I suspect that, and I have a feeling that he will become a great oak tree who will give shelter to many. Please say something useful to him. He's coming to leave. And so when Rinzai turned up before Obaku and took his leave, all Obaku said to him was, go to Daigu in the valley. Master Daigu lived in his monastery down at the foot of the mountain where Obaku was on the top. And so dutifully Rinzai went down there, gained an audience with Daigu, asked to join the community, and Daigu said, where have you come from? And he said, well, I've come from Obaku at the top of the mountain. And Daigu said, well, why have you come to me then? And Rinzai explained the 3 interviews that he'd had, at which point Daigu interrupted him and said, oh, you ungrateful little wretch, there Master Obaku shows you his grandmotherly kindness, and you repay him by leaving him? You should be ashamed of yourself. And with this rebuke, Rinzai awoke. Rinzai had his own awakening and just went, well, after all, there isn't much to Obaku's teaching, which itself is interesting, but we haven't really got time to go into that. Anyway, suffice to say that after a few more riposts between them, Rinzai returned, and Obaku, on seeing him, instantly realized something was different, and shortly after verified and validated Rinzai's insight, and everything went on from there, really. So that's the story of Master Rinzai coming to his own awakening, and here we have one of his sayings. Now, the thing about this is why I advocate the Rinzai Roku, is that his teachings are so to the point, and even though they're over 1,000 years old, they are very succinct, they're very direct. He's a very plain speaker, and there are many sayings that are attached to him, but here is one of them. Master Rinzai was fond of asking, what at this moment is lacking? Good question. So, well, let's ask ourselves that question. What at this moment is lacking? Well, I'm quite sure that if we sat down with a pen and paper, we could probably come out with the list that's as long as your arm. But we have to understand that, in fact, what Master Rinzai, of course, is saying is something slightly different. And when we see something like this, we must remember that Rinzai is saying a truth. And so we have to ask ourselves, well, how is this true? And in order to find that out, we have to go and stand in the place that Master Obaku himself is standing. And to really get a feeling for that, we have to go back to the Buddha himself, and in the Nirvana Sutra, the Mahayana Nirvana Sutra, when the Buddha himself awoke, it was said that the first words that he declared were, how wonderful, how miraculous, all beings, but all beings, are fully and completely endowed with the wisdom and the power of the Tathagata. But alas, because of their sticky attachments, human beings are not aware of it. So, we've talked about this Buddha nature before, this great, wonderful, mysterious Buddha nature. And also we've spoken to say that the Buddha declared that in fact human beings live in ignorance of this, and that when we talk about delusion in Buddhism, this is the basic one. This is the delusion, that the delusion of a separate self, an I, me or mine, obscures or cuts out, like the clouds covering the sun, the presence of the Buddha nature. The sun is still there. I mean, today is a cloudy day here in the garden. The sun is still shining above these clouds, but it just can't be seen. And so it is with the clouds of delusion. The clouds of delusion being that attachment to the notion of a separate self, an I, me, or mine. And with the absence of that, with the dissolving of that delusion, then that sun is seen. That's that light and that warmth, that clarity that light brings to things, and the warmth that it also brings, that the sun shines down on us, is also seen as well. However, because it's obscured, because we suffer from delusion, this is an artificial state. This is a situation or a state that does not reflect the truth of the matter. And this is what the Buddha meant. And when he says because of their sticky attachments, human beings are not aware of it, he's not even saying that we don't live out of the Buddha nature. We always do. Every moment, every single moment of our existence we do. But that not being aware of it produces a sense of a lack, that something is missing in us. And again, this experience is almost a gut felt thing, something we feel in our guts, that something is lacking. And because we feel something is lacking, that is the condition necessary to produce desire, to awaken the seeds in us, or the potential in us of desire. Rather in the same way that a genuinely thirsty man craves water and a genuinely hungry woman craves food, so we also give rise to many cravings as well. But from a Buddhist point of view, from a Mahayana point of view, and from a Zen point of view, actually what we are missing is the Buddha nature itself, the Buddha heart itself. But that this wanting gets projected out onto things, and then we chase after them. So we are prone to this. We are prone to chasing around after things. I mean, there's that fashionable phrase now, isn't it, called FOMO, fear of missing out, and this is where, being social creatures that we are, naturally being on social media, and in media in general, means that we pass these ideas around to each other about, you've got to have the latest this, and you've got to do that, and if you haven't seen this box set, and you must, go and wear this label, or whatever it is. And of course what these things do is that they tap into the seeds of desire that sit on the foundation of this feeling of a lack, and so they're constantly popping like popcorn, but they're awakening, and suddenly this feeling comes over. I must, I really do actually need that, and so we sort of go chasing after that. But actually, the answer itself, the fulfillment itself, actually lies in the energetic, dynamic quality of the desire, of the wanting itself, because the desire itself is arising out of the very heart that at root we are craving for, and that we are missing. If you like, it is like an echo. Our desires are like an echo, and we keep chasing after the echoes instead of returning to the source of that echo. And in a very practical way, this is so. I remember Venerable Myokyoni, when she was librarian at the Buddhist Society back in the 70s or 80s, I think. There was she said there was a very well dressed gentleman who used to come in, and he was from abroad, he used to, whenever he was in London, he would come to the Buddhist Society, and so she'd seen him a few times. He had business affairs in London, but he lived elsewhere. And one day he came in and we got chatting, and he said, yes, I really enjoy coming to London. He said, except, he says, I find it a place full of temptations. He said, in particularly your cake shops. I find it really difficult to walk past them without going in and buying one. And, he's a very svelte figure, very well dressed. He said, if I eat too many, I wouldn't be able to fit into my nice clothes. And so Kenny said, well, do you want to do something about this? And he said, yes, I do, actually. And so she said, well, okay, then I suggest this to you. Just go about your business, and the next time you walk past a cake shop and you see a cake and it seems to call to you, siren-like, if it seems to call to you, then go and stand in front of it. Don't resist it. Go and stand in front of it and really look at it. And inwardly, just say to yourself, I want that cake. Oh, I want that cake. I really want that cake. I want that cake. And go right into that I want that cake. And then cut off the cake. And you're just left with I want, I want, I want. And then close your eyes and cut off the I. Want, 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 want. And really go into that wanting for 5 or 10 minutes. Said, can you do that without being too self-conscious? He said, yeah, I think I can do that. So off he went. And she said about half an hour later, he came rushing back, saying, it works, I'm cured. And she said, no, you're not cured, she said, but now you know, when that impulse comes up, exactly what to do with it. Because, of course, these impulses go back to beginningless time. They're well conditioned over a long period of time, and so they will come up. There are many seeds in the store consciousness, and so they will keep coming up. However, when they come up, what she was basically doing was saying, don't get distracted by the cake. Don't even get distracted by the I who says he wants the cake. It's the energy of the wanting itself. Go right into that. And this is why, when we have those powerful impulses that come up, whatever they may be, we practice that, putting the hands together and then the bowing into it. And then we'll bow again into it. And we'll just say yes, either want or fear or anger, or depression, or whatever it is. We will just give ourselves into it and really physically give ourselves into it. Come back into it, because that energy itself is the energy of the heart, of the Buddha nature. And when we have lived that energy without allowing it to either be repressed, which is one extreme, or to flow out into FOMO, which is the other extreme, then it burns itself out and it reverts back to what it always has been, which is the humanized energy of the Buddha nature. And this is all part and parcel of those working with the bull herding pictures that we also know as well. And of course, if we don't do that, what we end up with is we end up being neurotic. We end up being driven by our desires, because although we think satisfying our desires is the most important thing in our life, who is it that chooses what I want in the end? And it's only when we try to go against it, such as giving up smoking or going on a diet, or if we drink too much, trying to cut back on the booze, or the gambling, or the shopping, the retail therapy, or whatever it is. It's only when we try and go against it that we suddenly realize that actually I'm not in control of this. This thing is driving me. Because this is what I am, this bundle of wants and opinions and so forth that's driving forth. And this is why this now takes us right the way back to what the Buddha, the medicine that the Buddha gave in the Four Noble Truths, that the cause of suffering is this sticky attachment, this drivenness, this clinging to, and therefore running headlong after things, which we do. And it's interesting because the evidence is there to show how to get out of it, as well in our ordinary everyday activities. I mean, once we so for example, most of us have a hobby of some sort or another. If you do have a hobby, the one thing that marks out the hobby is that we love to do it for its own sake. And when we do something for its own sake, when we take pleasure into that, then actually I forget myself, all those other concerns, all those other things that I must do, or if only I could change myself, or whatever it is. When those things get forgotten, literally forgotten, then we become at one with the doing, which is why we enjoy our hobbies, because when we become at one with the doing, our hearts are at peace. This is the taste, the tongue-tip taste of nirvana that we hear so much about. And that really sort of brings us back not only to the here and now, but also into the presence of our own heart as well. And this is really the only difference, that in a spiritual practice, in a Buddhist practice, in the Zen practice, we know this. We know this is what it's doing, and we know this is the direction that we go for true peace at heart. And in that situation, then, that question really comes into its own. What at this moment is lacking? When I am forgotten, when the cream cakes, or put whatever your favourite object is in there, when all that is forgotten, what at this moment is lacking? Notice that he's not asking the I that craves. He's speaking from the heart to the heart, in each and every one of us. What at this moment is lacking? In that complete oneness, there is that peace, and there is that serenity. And what's more, is that something mysterious happens then. When we're living out of that heart, what Campbell called hidden helping hands appear in life. And that's not to say that everything goes my way. Of course it doesn't. What it really means, though, is that somehow we feel guided, and we're being guided by our own heart into the circumstances where we need to go. And having faith in that process, having faith in that, means that a lot of the tortuous anguish that I feel about my life and what is my life about is answered in that peace and quiet as well. So it all goes together, that peace at heart, that nirvana, and that realization that actually in the end, the only thing that's been lacking is the realization that we are exactly where we need to be, which is standing in the place of our own heart. Okay, well, I think I'll leave it there for today. Thank you very much for joining me. Just to say, originally these talks were being given as a result of the lockdown here in the UK, and now much of that has gone. People are moving about and going back to work bit by bit in the sort of rather strange and curious circumstances that we find ourselves. We are being warned that new lockdowns could be implemented, obviously, and that the whole thing's not over. So I think for the time being, we will just have a few more of these talks, but I think at some point they may re-emerge in a new form. We'll see, or they may become slightly less frequent. But I know people do seem to be quite enjoying that. The feedback's been very good, and I'm glad you are finding them useful, and hopefully a little bit of spiritual nourishment along the way. So we will keep them going, but just to say, obviously, everything does come to an end at some point. So if you're interested in further material along these lines for study and practice, don't forget the Zen Gateway at www.thezengateway.com. Also, if you have a question, do send it to me. Love to hear about them. You can always write to me at thezengateway@gmail.com. So yes, there we go. All right, have a good week, and see you again next week, all being well. Thank you.